All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, wake up the echoes as the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame are headed to Miami as they have punched their ticket into the semis of the college football playoff. Now, coming into this contest with Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, I expected it was going to be a defensive struggle, and we got that between two of the top defensive teams in football. This was a defensive struggle that did not have that much wiggle room for either team to make mistakes. And as Georgia made their mistakes, the Irish were right there to capitalize. You think about it, Georgia was driving deep into Notre Dame territory in the first quarter when running back Trevor Etienne got hit. He fumbled the ball and it was recovered by the Fighting Irish. You think about it also in the first half when Georgia quarterback Gunner Stockton hooked up on that deep pass down the sidelines for Georgia that to a wide receiver, Arian Smith, his only catch of the game, but nonetheless, it was a situation. Yes, it was a 67-yard game, but instead of Georgia being set up at the Notre Dame 11, they had to go back to the 26-yard line after a sideline interference penalty on Georgia. Why? Because as the official was running down the field, he collided with Georgia walk-on quarterback Parker Jones, who came into that white strip on the sidelines that basically, guys on the sideline should not be on. Okay. And unfortunately for Parker Jones, he's probably going to hear about it from a lot of folks around the Georgia program for now, for a very long time. But nonetheless, instead of Georgia being at the 11-yard line, they started at the 26. The play call was a little bit different from there. And I think it really hindered Georgia, in my opinion. But nonetheless, they had to settle for a field goal to make it 3-0. After that, it was just trading field goals. Notre Dame, they got their first field goal of the game, but for me to not to score three, but for me, a telling moment in this game. Okay, the Irish had just kicked their second field goal of the contest to go up 6-3. It was late in the first half. Georgia got the ball back with about 30 or 40 seconds left, and I get it that Georgia head coach Kirby Smart wanted to be aggressive, but he's got to realize the time and the situation. And the reason why Georgia was trailing 6-3, they were deep in their own territory, and I expected Georgia to maybe to have a screen pass, maybe just run the football. No, he dropped Gunner Stockton back, and it was one of those where you could see right here where the inexperience from Stockton came into play because he didn't have that imaginary play clock in his head as a quarterback. The Irish defensive ends collapsed the pocket, and before you even blinked, it was a strip sack fumble that was recovered by Notre Dame at the 13-yard line. And on the very next play, Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard hooked up with wide receiver Bo Collins to give the Fighting Irish a 13-3 advantage at the half. So instead of Georgia only being down 6-3, they were now down by 10 points. And then the cherry on top of all of that was to begin the second half when Jaden Harrison for Notre Dame took the opening kickoff back 98 yards to put the Fighting Irish up 20-3. And at that point, it really changed the tenor of this game because Georgia, regardless of who's playing quarterback, they pride themselves on their run game. At this point, the Bulldogs were one dimensional and they had to rely on Gunner Stockton. Yes, Gunner Stockton was game. He gave it everything that he had, but of course, more drops from the Georgia wide receivers. His offensive line didn't do him any favors. The running game for Georgia didn't do him any favors. In regards to that running game, it was a situation where, hey, credit to Notre Dame defensive coordinator Al Golden because he basically said, and this is without a lot of game tape on Gunner Stockton. What'd you have? The second half of the SEC championship game, that was it. But nonetheless, Al Golden basically said, hey, we're going to make Gunner Stockton beat us with his arm. And unfortunately for Georgia, he was unable to do that. But getting back to that play that ended the first half, if you're Georgia and you're Kirby Smart, in my opinion, You should have learned from the end of the first half in the SEC championship game. We saw Carson Beck attempting that Hail Mary, of course. We know about the injury that he sustained against Texas, and this is why Georgia had to go with Gunner Stockton now. But nonetheless, Georgia, at that point, they were down 20-3. They tried valiantly, but every time that they tried, Notre Dame had an answer for them. The Irish, they ran the football effectively today. And in the second half, when they needed to, they were able to play keep away. They had 154 yards on the ground in this contest compared to just 62 from Georgia. Notre Dame was ready to go. Okay, and it's one of those where I figured this was going to be a close game. I picked Georgia to win this game, and the thing was, I really thought that the Bulldogs' defense and the Bulldogs' running game was going to be up for the challenge. Meaning, you know what, they were going to try to take some pressure off of Gunner Stockton, and it was one of those where Notre Dame didn't pass the football a lot, but when they did, it was effective. And then, of course, when you think about Riley Leonard, it's not just him as a quarterback, it's also him as a runner. And he made those key runs when he had to in this contest. He led Notre Dame with 80 yards on the ground. He also had 90 yards through the air. And for me, in watching Notre Dame's offensive gameplay, you can see that they watched a lot of the Georgia Tech game. And if you watch that game, a game that went to I can't even remember how many overtimes that it went to, but nonetheless, Georgia Tech quarterback Haynes King gave this Bulldogs defense fits all day long, not just with his ability to pass the football, but more as a runner. And I really do think that Notre Dame keyed on that game plan and used it to help neutralize this Georgia defense. But it's one of those where Gunner Stockton, like I said, he gave it everything that he had, but no disrespect to him, but you could see why he was the backup quarterback. You know, some of the mistakes that he made on that key fourth down miss when Georgia was trying to cut it to 23-17 in the fourth quarter, that was big right there. Like I said, the quarterback clock in the pocket at times when things are breaking down for him. That's going to come from experience. And that's something, you know, it's one of those, he got thrown into the fire very quickly here. It was one thing against Texas, okay, where Texas wasn't expecting to see Gunner Stockton because he really didn't play throughout the season. All right, they didn't have any game film on him, but nonetheless, it's one of those where Notre Dame, they had a little bit of game film on him, and credit to Al Golden as he dialed it up and said, hey, we're not going to let this kid beat us. And even when he's going back there to throw, they heated him up. They dialed up the pressure. Notre Dame sacked Gunner Stockton 4 times in this contest, and they were relentless with their pressure. And I think that was a big difference in this game. And for Notre Dame, you've got to give head coach Marcus Freeman his due. This is his third full season as Notre Dame's head coach. Each year, his Fighting Irish have gotten better. And now you're talking about a guy that is 32-9, and he's 2 wins away from bringing Notre Dame their first national championship in nearly 40 years. Okay, this guy, he's done an amazing job. It was one of those where when Brian Kelly left Notre Dame in 2021, and of course he left in the fashion that he did, a lot of people were questioning what direction would this program be going in. And a lot of people were shocked that it was Marcus Freeman. And every single year, Notre Dame has finished the season ranked. And I guarantee you that the Fighting Irish, win or lose in their next game, they're going to finish this season ranked in the top 10. Now, on the flip side, so much for the SEC. And, you know, it's all about the big bad SEC. Some of us thought that the SEC was going to get 4 teams into this college football playoff field. They got 3. And of those 3, it's down to just one with the semis. And the one that is still around, it's Texas. And Texas should really thank their lucky stars that they got past Arizona State yesterday via that controversial non-call on targeting. So things are definitely changing with this expanded playoff. And I'll be talking about more on that subject in the coming days. But for Georgia, you think about it, so close, yet so far. Georgia, of course, they won the national championship in 2021, won it again in 2022. They thought they were going back last year. They were the top ranked team in the nation until they fell to Alabama in the SEC championship game and missed their opportunity to get into the then four-team college football playoff. Of course, it's a day late and a dollar short for Georgia. This time around, they were clearly going to be in the college football playoff. The injury to Carson Beck really changed things for the Bulldogs, and it's unfortunate. So it's going to be interesting to see how Kirby Smart and company go back to the drawing board for next year. But Kirby Smart is a relentless recruiter. Georgia always has one of the top classes coming in the nation, and you can expect the Bulldogs to be back in the thick of things come 2025. But nonetheless, for Notre Dame, it's on to Miami as they have a date with Penn State in the semis. And I think this is going to be a thriller. The only thing that I'm disappointed about for the game is it's a shame that we can't see this game here in January in either South Bend or Happy Valley, because you think about two big time programs, one in Western Pennsylvania and the other one in Indiana. And these are two of the blue bloods of the sport. And now they're going to be getting it on for a shot in the national championship game. And I expect, once again, a very physical game. You have two good defensive clubs, both in Penn State and Notre Dame. Points are going to be in a premium, at a premium, and you're going to have two electric fan bases going. We saw the Penn State folks come out and support their team in round number one. At the Fiesta Bowl against Boise State, the crowd was really in favor of the Broncos. This time around, I think the Penn State folks are going to show up in Miami. I know that the Notre Dame folks are going to show up in Miami as well. But nonetheless, I think we are in store for a tremendous game 1 week from tonight. But nonetheless, Notre Dame went down to New Orleans. They took care of their business. Like I said, it was expected to be a defensive struggle, and I think the defenses reigned supreme. More Notre Dame's defense than Georgia's defense, and I think the inexperience of Gunner Stockton showed up at times. And of course, the things that hurt Georgia all season long came up once again to bite them, especially the drop passes. But Notre Dame was ready. They took care of their business, and now it's on to the semis in the college football playoff. But folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. John, what's going on? You're saying big win for the program and the future. Listen, I'll tell you like this, my man. I think Notre Dame is headed in the right direction. And credit to Marcus Freeman from the aspect of saying, hey, you know what? He hasn't been able to get the quarterbacks for his program through recruiting, but he's made the most of it in the transfer portal. You figure he went 10-3 last year with Sam Hartman, the former Wake Forest quarterback. And this time around, he dipped back in to the ACC country, and he got Riley Leonard from Duke. And it's one of those where for Notre Dame, their backs were against the wall after that Northern Illinois loss. Nobody saw that coming. And I didn't think that Notre Dame was going to rally in the fashion that they did. I thought coming into the season, I said, hey, Notre Dame could be uh, a playoff team. And I think that one, in my opinion, I was out the window after the Northern Illinois loss. But you saw this team week by week; they got better and better and better. And I think it's sometimes, a coach can tell kids so much, but sometimes, they have to, taste defeat. And I think in that defeat to Northern Illinois, it really woke this team up, and they've played lights out football. And this is why I think the game a week from now against Penn State is going to be a dandy. I think two proud football programs with a ton of tradition are going to be getting it on in Miami. The defenses are going to be, I think they're going to be kings, and I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on the respective quarterbacks for those teams. Riley Leonard, of course, for Notre Dame, and then, of course, Drew Aller for Penn State. You're saying, as a lifelong Domer, I can say Freeman has been the best thing to happen to the university since Lou Holtz. Listen, I'll tell you like this. Once Lou Holtz left Notre Dame, they were in a weird spot because, Bob Davie was kind of like the guy who was groomed. He would give you a good year and then a so-so year. He'd give you a good year and then a so-so year. And then, of course, eventually that got played out there. And then they brought in Tyrone Willingham. It was kind of like the same thing. You start strong with somebody else's recruits and then you fizzle out. And we saw the whole thing with Charlie Weiss and Notre Dame thought that they struck gold, no pun intended, and that didn't work out. And then there was Brian Kelly. And I really thought that Brian Kelly at the time was perfect for Notre Dame. The problem was Brian Kelly had always had a foot out the door as he was looking for a better opportunity. And then, of course, that opportunity came up with LSU. And the funny thing about it, the folks at LSU look like they're not thrilled with Brian Kelly at the time right now, especially since he has not gotten this team to the college football playoff, especially here this year in this expanded postseason. And of course, the program that he left, they're doing it up right now. You're saying Freeman has 9 straight wins against ranked opponents. Kelly always choked against top talent, and it seems like Freeman has figured it out. I'll say this, excuse me, Freeman's defenses are better than Kelly's defenses. And one thing for it, Freeman played defense. He played linebacker at Ohio State, okay? And he bleeds and sweats that side of the football. And I think him bringing in Al Golden is big because Al Golden, a former head coach, at the University of Miami, and then of course before that Temple. He's a guy that knows the ins and outs of the game, and I think it's going to be very interesting because now you got Al Golden going up against his alma mater in the college in the semis in Penn State, but nonetheless, getting back to Brian Kelly, I will say this: he's a guy that Notre Dame looks like they're better off without, and it looks like LSU is stuck with at least for right now. Okay, it's and I think it's kind of, I'm not going to say it's ironic, but it's just very interesting, just due to the fact that when you think about it, Brian Kelly left Notre Dame, and this is no disrespect to LSU because LSU is a big job as well, but it's really not that often when when you see guys saying, "Hey, I'm leaving Notre Dame to go someplace else." I remember the story 'cause I remember when it happened when Lou Holtz left Notre Dame, but he sat out for some time, did some TV before taking the South Carolina job. But it was all about him not wanting to pass Newt Rodney's record. Okay, and Brian Kelly, I really thought he was going to be a lifer at Notre Dame, and when he made the decision to leave and go to LSU, I think it shocked a lot of people. And I think when Notre Dame decided to hire Marcus Freeman, I don't think people knew uh, what to say about it because I really thought that Notre Dame was going to try for a big time hire, aka an established head coach, and they saw something in Marcus Freeman, and they saw something in Marcus Freeman that a lot of other people did not see. But I'll tell you like this: go back and look at that video when he was introduced to the guys who were remaining at Notre Dame once Brian Kelly left, and you saw the love that they got. And of course, I know he lost his first game as a head coach in the Fiesta Bowl that year. They lost to Ohio State, but nonetheless, through it all, his teams, he's been able to establish his program, and now he's getting his guys in there. And now this is officially Marcus Freeman's team. And you look at it, he's got a lot of NFL talent on this team, and I think that's what Notre Dame, wanted to get back to because, of course, if you're sending guys to the NFL early on, guess what? The high school kids are looking at that and saying, hey, you know what? I want to go play with that, play for that guy. And you're definitely saying the locker room definitely love him. Freeman took over. Lots of people say he's a player's coach. Golden and Denrock were sweet pickups. Denrock went to LSU with Kelly, but came back. Brian Kelly, I don't know him personally, but he looks like the type of guy that can wear on people very quickly, both players and coaches. But nonetheless, you look at Notre Dame right now, they've got some NFL talent on that team. Xavier Watts is going to hear his name called uh, probably in the first round of next year's NFL next year in April's NFL draft. It's only about 3.5 months away. I think the same thing could be said um, for Jack Kaiser at linebacker. I think he's a linebacker's linebacker, one of those guys. I'm going old school here for a minute, okay? And John, I'm going to test to see how far back you go with Notre Dame football. When I think about Jack Kaiser playing linebacker at Notre Dame, a name that comes up for me, Michael Stonebreaker. I don't know if you remember him. Okay, he was a linebacker during the Lou Holtz years, but nonetheless, that's what I think about when I think about the way that Jack Kaiser plays. You got a lot of guys who are second generation guys at Notre Dame. Their dads played in the NFL. You got Howard Cross the third. One guy, just to think about, playing on that D line, and then credit to that Notre Dame D line because they did it without arguably their best player today in one Riley Mills. And that was going to be a big thing for Notre Dame coming into this contest, not having him on that D line. But these guys stepped up. The whole front seven of Notre Dame really stepped up, keeping that pressure on Gunner Stockton. And again, for me, that comes back to coaching. First and foremost, Marcus Freeman at the head spot. But then on top of that, Al Golden as the D coordinator, really having his guys ready to play. I really want to be interested to see what the defensive game plan is going to be for Penn State because Penn State, with Drew Aller, that's clearly going to be the best quarterback that Notre Dame has faced so far in the college football playoff. Penn State definitely has some talent at the wide receiver position. They're going to run the football with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. And the one thing about Penn State's offense, they get better as as the game goes along. And then the other thing for me, that all-world tight end for Penn State, Tyler Warren, he is definitely a matchup nightmare. And then this Penn State defense, is Abdul Carter going to be healthy? Because if Abdul Carter is healthy, that changes a lot of things that Penn State's defense is going to be able to do against Notre Dame. Notre Dame is going to try to run the football, but I think against Penn State, they're going to have to find a way to throw the football, which is easier said than done. James Franklin's going to have his guys ready to play. And of course, Penn State has a 2-day advantage as far as rest and preparation. And I'm sure that Franklin was probably nice and comfortable in his living room watching this game this evening with Notre Dame and Georgia. And I guarantee you that Penn State's probably already at work getting ready for Notre Dame. But I guarantee you that on the flight home tonight, Marcus Freeman and his coaching staff are probably already getting their game plan ready to take on the Nittany Lions a week from now in Miami. You're saying, yeah, Kaiser came back for Freeman in his senior year, which is big. That's coaching. Okay, that's love for a coach, of course. I'm sure that NIL money had something to do with that as well. But nonetheless, guys come back when they want to play for a coach. And you're also said, I'm excited to see how Xavier Watts matches up with the tight end from PSU. Wow, that I'll tell you like that. That's going to be an NFL preview right there because I think Tyler Warren next year could be what Brock Bowers what has been this year for the Raiders in the NFL. He's that talented. You could line him up at so many different positions. And I think that's something that the Notre Dame defense definitely has a key on. It's going to be easier said than done because if you put too much attention on Tyler Warren. Those Penn State running backs, Thunder and Lightning. I'm talking about Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. They can pick you apart. And then you also have to worry about Drew Aller at quarterback because he's a guy who doesn't make a lot of mistakes out there. So nonetheless, I think that's going to be a great game. It's one of those where I don't know what a semifinal game I'm more excited for: Ohio State, Texas, or Notre Dame, Penn State. And honestly, if I think about it, I got to stay Notre Dame, Penn State because for me, I feel like Texas got bailed out yesterday. I know it's in the woulda, coulda, shoulda category, but they should have lost to Arizona State. That was a bad no call that should have been targeting, and we really should be talking about Ohio State, Arizona State right now. But nonetheless, it's the all blue blood semis, which was to be expected in this college football playoff. You got Ohio State and Texas, and then you got Notre Dame and Miami, and it's a lot of matchups that I'm looking forward to in both of these games. And there's going to be a lot of NFL talent on display. You got a lot of first rounders potentially for all four of these teams that are going at it. But nonetheless, getting back to Notre Dame today and what they were able to do. For me, I felt like Marcus Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart. And I think the prime example of that was that formation on fourth down. It was basically like an NHL line change where, you know what, basically shifted everybody out of there. And if you're Georgia in that situation, you've got to know that you got to hold your water. And unfortunately, they weren't able to hold their water, and they gave Notre Dame a free 5 yards. And of course, even at that point, if Notre Dame doesn't score, it still allows them more time to keep bleeding that clock. And at that point, when you've got a double digit lead in the second half, the clock becomes your best friend. And that's what Notre Dame was able to do this evening. John, you're saying, I think OSU about to make Texas look sloppy, still hoping it leads to some overconfidence. OSU's been looking scary. I'll tell you like this. So far, Ohio State has been the best team in this playoff. And it's one of those where they were favored, big in that game yesterday against Oregon, and they're favored big on Texas. I think right now they're a 6-point favorite over Texas in Arlington at the Cotton Bowl for next Friday night. And if Ohio State keeps playing like they have been playing, and Texas keeps playing like they've been playing, guess what? It's going to be a long night for the Longhorns next Friday at the Cotton Bowl. Ohio State is looking scary. Okay. So, and I said this after the game yesterday. I said, listen, if Ohio State plays, and I even said it after they beat Tennessee in round one, if Ohio State plays like how they've played in the first two games, there's nobody in the nation that's going to beat them. And I'll also say this: go figure that that Michigan loss might have been just what the Buckeyes needed, because they've heard a lot about it. Okay, and they're bringing it. And I think so far, this playoff, if you look at the four teams that are still alive, it's all about redemption, because you think about the coaches. Ryan Day has heard about not winning the big game at Ohio State. James Franklin has heard about it, at Penn State. People have questioned Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. And then, of course, you've got Steve Sarkisian at Texas. And somebody is going to right all of those wrongs within the next couple of weeks, because somebody is going to get their first national championship as a head coach. I guarantee you, just for the sake of argument, if Ohio State loses to Texas, and there's still going to be some of those Buckeyes in the fan base that want to get rid of Ryan Day. He's not going anywhere. The same thing can be said about James Franklin at Penn State. He's not going anywhere. I think right now, Marcus Freeman has solidified himself at Notre Dame. Okay, he's the guy, and he's going to be the guy for years to come. I think he's relatable to his players. He has created, in my opinion, a good environment there. He's created a good program. And I think that's going to allow him to continue to establish things in South Bend for as long as he wants to. You said that you live on the Michigan Ohio line, and that rivalry game gave OSU all the smoke that they needed to light a fire under them. I think losing the game, hearing about it, and then, of course, everything with the whole flag planting controversy, it kind of woke them up. And maybe, just maybe, Michigan woke up a sleeping giant, and maybe Ohio State needed that. Okay, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Real quick though, in regards to that, I actually met somebody a couple of weeks ago who grew up and is actually from Columbus. And having a conversation with him, I just immediately said, "Oh, go Bucks! I know you're an Ohio State fan." He was like, "Actually, I'm a Michigan fan." And I teased him and I said, "I didn't know that was allowed in Columbus," but nonetheless, you're talking about a guy who's in Columbus that is all about the maize and blue. But nonetheless, the Buckeyes look poised, and I think all four of the teams that are still here, they've taken different avenues to get to this point of the game, but nonetheless, they're here. Survive and advance. It's just like the NCAA tournament for basketball. It's just like the NFL playoffs. One game. That's all it is. And if you don't bring your A game, that's all she wrote. Now for Georgia, I knew the one thing that Georgia had going in their favor was the fact that hey, they had additional time after the SEC championship game to try to get Gunner Stockton up to speed. That's why I thought it was so important for them to win the game. But at first, Kirby Smart was trying to explore all options to try to get Carson Beck back out there. That didn't work. And if anybody saw the play, you kind of really expected Carson Beck to not be out there. It was basically eerily similar to what we saw with Brock Purdy a couple of years ago in the playoffs for the 49ers. So, it's kind of like the NCAA tournament for basketball where we see a top seed lose their best player and they might get dropped down a peg, but of course the committee was not going to drop Georgia down any further after they won the SEC. But the Bulldogs were going to be at a disadvantage, and credit to Notre Dame for going out there and taking advantage of it. If you remember, uh, at halftime today, you know, Marcus Freeman talked about being aggressive because he knows how Georgia can come back on teams in the second half. And I think that opening kickoff of the second half for the touchdown really, I think it really set the tone for Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's defense, they stepped up all game. You think about the big hit on Trevor Etienne in the first quarter to cause the fumble. And you think about the strip sack of Stockton just before the half. And Notre Dame basically went on a run. They scored 17 points within about a minute or less than a minute's worth of game clock because you figure the field goal to go up 6-3. The next play for Georgia, the strip sack fumble. The play after that, Riley Leonard hooking up with Bo Collins on Notre Dame's touchdown pass, and then of course the kickoff return. So Georgia got blitzed, and that's the type of thing that Georgia usually does to other teams. This time around, it was Notre Dame doing it to them, and unfortunately for the Bulldogs, they could not recover from it. You're saying we always hear how big and strong and physical the SEC is. So seeing Georgia play like this was surprising, and I'm sure Beck would have made a difference. Listen, Carson Beck being out there would have made a huge difference. I mean, if Notre Dame didn't have Riley Leonard, we're probably not talking about them. Georgia was going to have to step up out there. And it was one of those where those guys unfortunately didn't. They didn't get good play from their offensive line. They didn't get good run play as well. And then their defense at times wasn't as flawless as they needed to be in this game. When one part of your team is a little bit weaker, everybody else has got to step up. And like I said before, the Georgia team let Gunner Stockton down. And again, Notre Dame went out there and they took advantage of it. It's one of those Knicks 100. What's going on? You're saying SEC is a scam. Well, I think this might what's happened so far, not just in the playoff, but also in the bowl picture as well. It's going to make people sit back and think twice a little bit with the seeding next year for the college football playoff because there's going to be some retooling. And I don't think that people are going to say, hey, you know what? Let's just give the SEC a pass. And I'll say this about the SEC. I am not a fan of them only playing 8 conference games a year. You got 16 teams in your league right now. You've got to bump that up to 9 like the Big 10 does, like the Big 12 does, like the Pac 12 used to do. Okay, you've got to bump that up because if you're going to have so many teams in your league, I think you have to play more conference games. All right. It's a situation where I feel like if you're going to have a 12 game schedule for the season as a power conference, 9 conference games, one out of conference game against another power school from a power conference, and then you could do whatever you want to do with your cupcakes or your rivalry games or whatever else. And the SEC did get the benefit of the doubt from beating up on each other this year, and it's still a legit conference. I'm not taking anything away from them, but your bread is buttered, and you get the opportunity to poke your chest out and brag. Um, when you go up against the other conferences. And so far, we have not seen it in this postseason, whether it's been the playoff or whether it's been bowl season. And you're looking at it right now. There's a very strong possibility that we could get Big Ten versus Big Ten in the national championship game. That's just the way it is. And of course, that would be, if that were to be the case, hypothetically speaking, that of course would be something for the Big Ten to hang its hat on. But nonetheless, I think the SEC has got to go back to the drawing board right now and say, hey, we got to do things a little bit better. And of course, I'll tell you like this: one thing that definitely didn't help the SEC this time around was this was the first year post Nick Saban. Now I know Nick Saban only ran one program at Alabama, but he was kind of like the godfather, if you will, of the Southeastern Conference for a very long time. So let's see if Sark and Texas can keep that SEC tradition going, because I think if Texas doesn't win against Ohio State, it's going to be the first time in a very long time. I can't remember what the year is off the top of my head where we would not have an SEC team playing for the national championship. I think it was probably, if I can remember, I think it might have been when Texas played USC in the Rose Bowl. Okay, and that was nearly 20 years ago. And of course, Texas in those days was Big 12, and of course, USC was Pac 10 then at the time. So nonetheless, it's going to be interesting to see. But again, the SEC has really taken it on the chin, and I equate it real quick, not to sound too long winded on this, but I equate it to in college basketball, we see some schools that get a lot of teams into the conference, but things don't work out for them in the conference tournament. And I think the SEC is finding that out the hard way this time around on the gridiron. But nonetheless, I think that this has been a tremendous playoff so far. I think we are in store for three more tremendous games: the two semifinal games, and of course, the national championship game, which is going to take place in about 2.5, 3 weeks, give or take. But nonetheless, it's been tremendous. The four teams that are still around, they're surviving. And let's see who has what it takes to get from the semis to the championship game. But folks, it's been a lot of good talk about Notre Dame and their big win over Georgia this evening at the Sugar Bowl. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning into this 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. If you like what you heard and you saw on this podcast tonight, please feel free to hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. I definitely appreciate all of the support. If you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. And there's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Please feel free to check it out and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Knicks 100, happy new year to you. And I hope that everything goes well for you and all of your loved ones here in the year of 2025. John, first time chiming in, and I definitely appreciate all of your commentary on this one. Please feel free to like this podcast as well as subscribing to this channel, because I tell you like this, brother, we got plenty to talk about for the remainder of this playoff. I think the semis are going to be tremendous, and I think the championship game is going to be a humdinger, as they would say. But definitely appreciate you chiming in on this one. And as always, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.